Hey, everybody. I'm Pastor Joni here with Get Real Radio. God bless you guys. Thank you for joining us. Get Real is a radio and podcast outreach of Mercy Chapel, located at 1861 Main Street in Sanford, Maine. And again, I just want to thank you guys for joining us here on the program. I wanted to talk about something today that really has I don't know if we as the church or believers, people in general have any idea as to how deep pride can affect us and how much of an effect and how much of an adverse effect it has on our lives, on our workplaces, our jobs, our homes, at times with our kids and our spouses, families. I mean, marriages have been destroyed with this issue. Entire kingdoms have, come to ruin because of pride, because of haughtiness. And, the Bible in Proverbs 16, it says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. And I don't know if many of you probably listening to this, you understand that concept, and you've probably read this in Proverbs 16:18. You probably know this, you've heard it. We see these things, sometimes, underlined and highlighted verses about pride in our Bibles. But it's really important for us to take note as to how destructive this can actually be. I mean, how many people do we know that have lost jobs because they refused to humble themselves to their boss, or to humble themselves even to coworkers, okay, or to admit that they did something wrong? How many people have lost men and women have lost the ability to care for and to take care of their home and their families. They've lost their jobs because, they fly off at the handle. They lose control. How many accidents have we gotten in, road rage accidents, and how many times have people gotten into it? And these days we're seeing a lot more of this. We're starting to see a lot more outbursts of wrath in the public areas. Okay. We're starting to see just people losing their mind all over the place. And all of that has its roots in pride, an inability or a lack of a desire to humble oneself, to admit wrongdoing, to really just be the bigger, lower person. And those two things, believe it or not, biblically combine very well. Nobody wants to be the welcome mat. Nobody wants to be the one that gets, that gets taken advantage of. Nobody wants to be the person who is looking weaker. A desire, especially in our culture and in our society, to ladder up and be better than and have the last word, and really just kind of jockeying for position in almost every area or aspect of our life. I use the driving analogy because most of us, if you're listening to this, you probably have driven at some point, and you think about how many times, when you're in traffic at a traffic light or at a stop or whatever, and, somebody's trying to squeak in front of you and you're just not letting them because, whatever, they didn't wait their turn, or, someone cuts you off and you just lose your mind. And, pride can be the cause of a lot of destruction. How many times have marriages been completely and utterly destroyed because one or both parties involved, the husbands and the wives, neither one is willing to relent. Neither one is willing to humble themselves. Neither one is willing to trust in the Lord because they want to just hang on to a position. They want to really just, they want to hip check the other one right out of the way. And pride does, in fact, come before destruction. Haughty, lifted up spirit. Again, we know pride has its roots in the enemy. The enemy was lifted up with pride. There was pride found in him, covetousness found in him, and that is what caused his fall. But it really is important for us to understand the practical, and what I mean is the practical implications that this one particular sin has on our lives, in our day-to-day lives. It really, and then even in the midst of, what we know to be practical application, the effect that pride has even in our own salvation. I mean, even in terms of the world and, a Christ-denying world, a complete lack of humility, and an entire world system. Now, I mean, we have an entire month in our culture now dedicated to this one issue. pride. Okay, we have now in our culture, we have implemented a month that is delegated to only pride, and it's a sin. It's straight up just blasphemous, man. But pride can cause us to lose more than just, again, more than just the battle. We lose the war. People who stay in a prideful state, who refuse to humble themselves before the Lord and admit that they need a savior, that they're sinners. Those who refuse to admit their own iniquities and their own transgressions before a holy God will ultimately, Proverbs 16:18 has eternal ramifications. A haughty spirit before the fall, before the ultimate demise, one who's lifted up, who refuses to humble themselves before a holy God, that person will suffer eternally. And again, this is not just something, and while this can be, and often is, for lack of a better term, it's a sin that can be elevated. It's a sin where, where people are proud to talk about their pride, interestingly enough, where people will say, yeah, well, people will boast in the fact that they have strong personalities. They boast in the fact that, they're loud, or they boast in the fact that, they are, unwilling or unyielding and unwilling to back down at any moment in time. And from a biblical perspective, it makes no sense that's not an attribute that we should be seeking to attain. Pride is not something that, from a biblical perspective, that we should really be looking for in our own lives. And I understand being proud of, achievements. Okay. I get that. And being proud of people who, maybe, children who have achieved great things, whether they're young children or adult children, being proud of them and, being happy for them. That's not really what I'm talking about. When we talk about pride, it's personal pride. It's personal elevation. Okay. When we start to suffer from this is when it really has a detrimental practical effect on our lives. And Paul would say this in dealing with humility in Philippians chapter 2. And this is just a wonderful chapter to really read through, filter through. Allow Philippians chapter 2, if you have opportunity, when you have time, read through it, man, and just let it sink in. Let the weight of these verses really sink in and take root in your heart and in your mind, because they're just packed. We could spend weeks just on each verse individually. But Paul says this, and seeing as I only have a few minutes here, I just to kind of gloss over this briefly. Paul says, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, okay, if there's any of this, if there's any consolation, all right, peace in Christ, if we are benefactors of the peace of Christ, if there's consolation in that, if any comfort of love and fellowship, okay, fellowship. Now remember, this is a letter written to a church, the church at Philippi, okay, there are believers within this church that Paul is trying to unite, okay, there was some division in this particular church and a schism. And what causes that 99.9% of the time is pride. It's being lifted up, a willingness to, or a lack of a will to yield. Okay. Nobody wants to give up their position. And not only that, but we want to point fingers and we want to elevate ourselves and we want to prove ourselves right. And it can destroy us. So he goes on and says, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord and of one mind. And then he goes on and he really gets down to the root of our human condition. In verse 3, he says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Man, if that doesn't go against our nature, I don't know what does. If that one verse in verse 3 doesn't just grind our carnal gears, man, it goes right against our nature. Everything that we're taught in this world goes, just staunchly against this concept in terms of what we're taught to ladder up and to be the best and to make everybody else look bad and never give up any footing in any aspect of our lives. This verse in verse 3 obliterates all of that idea. Let nothing be done. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition. Man, that is so anti-worldview. That is so anti-carnal living. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition. Everything that we're taught, everything that we learn, and everything that we know from the time that we're little children is done through selfish ambition. Every goal that we want to achieve outside Christ is done through selfish ambition. When we don't know the Lord, everything is to serve ourselves. The relationships that we get in when we're little children, we fight over toys. And it doesn't matter how many toys you have in your corner when you're a 2-year-old. What matters is your friend who's playing with the one toy you don't have, you want that one because that's the only one you don't want, and you're not willing to give it up. And this is when the tears come, especially in the little children. And what's interesting is that not much changes. We grow and we age. However, what we find is if we don't mature spiritually, we don't mature at all. And so we carry a lot of these, a lot of the things that we were taught as children, a lot of what we've learned as kids, we kind of carry these habits into our adulthood. And so when we're up against someone else, whether it's in our family, whether it's at work, or whether it's even it's more specifically at church, we don't want to give up any ground because we don't want to be looked at as the loser. We don't want to be viewed as a loser. And we don't want to we want to be the winner. We want to win all the time. And when we fail to relent and we fail to esteem others greater or better than ourselves, when we fail to, when we start to do everything in selfish ambition and conceit, that is when our world around us begins to crumble. And so Paul says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. And then he goes, on the contrary, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Consider your life a debt. Esteem other people better than yourself. Look at your life as a life of servitude, as a life of doulos. You're a bond slave to Christ, and you're willing to take on the characteristics of the Lord. And he goes on and uses Christ as an example as how to do this. And we'll get into this a little bit more later on in tomorrow's session, but this is a really great place to start. You know, James would say this in James 4:10. Most of you probably know this. Humble yourselves before the Lord in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Man, I'll tell you, pride is the devil's playground. He knows exactly what to do when we respond and react in pride. He knows exactly how to make us dance. But the enemy doesn't know how to deal with humility at all. When someone humbles themselves before the Lord or humbles themselves to a situation, if someone is able to return a harsh word with a kind word and turn away and quench wrath, man, the enemy doesn't know how to deal with that. He is, in fact, in all things, extraordinarily prideful. And so what we see here is Paul laying out for us a very good application to bless us, not to hurt us, and not to teach us and to coach us, but to bless us so that we're not hurt and harmed by this incredibly difficult sin. We'll pick more up on this later on in some of our other sessions. God bless you guys, and thank you for joining us here today on Get Real Radio. God bless. Bye-bye.